Everybody, give it up for Steve Sewell, everybody.
What's up, everybody? I am excited to show you a bunch of cool stuff you can do with LLMs. I know you've seen cool stuff. I know you want to use them for your work, regardless of what tools you're able to use. And so I'm going to mostly demo. This is very risky, but we'll see if our demos go well, especially because Anthropic Claude's been having a lot of outages lately, so we'll do our best. So first, who am I? I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Builder.io. I'll show you some of the stuff we make as part of this. And I've also made some popular open source projects you may have heard of in the AI space and front-end development. So really, really quickly stepping back. LLMs, it's hard to remember sometimes. All they are is just fancy predictive text systems. You've seen a lot of cool stuff they do, but all they do is take text and guess what text is going to come next. Underneath the hood, they're powered by very, very, very large neural networks. Those things are designed after how our brains work. And it turns out when you take a bunch of nodes and connect them based on what's relative or related to other nodes, you get these interesting emergent properties where they can do and come up with and reason about and think about things surprisingly similar to humans, which makes them both surprisingly smart and surprisingly dumb. And a lot of the goal of whether you're using an LLM in your workflow to build things or you're building products that use an LLM under the hood is how do you maximize as many of the good parts as possible while minimizing as many of the bad parts as possible. Interestingly enough, these are completely general purpose technologies. They can be used for tons of use cases, but fortunate for us in this room, coding is by a good margin the most adopted and most reliable use case people today use LLMs for. And so let's talk about how we can actually use them most effectively. I want to talk about 3 areas. I'm going to have demos of all these things. You probably already use an LLM in your IDE already. You're probably not using some of the techniques I'm going to show that I think are actually the most powerful and the most useful, and a sign of kind of where this technology is going. I especially want to talk about agents. I think a lot of people use this word wrong. I'm going to cover, I think, the correct definition of this and show examples of using agents today that I think are actually useful, not hypothetical, but like I use them every day for certain purposes that I think work great. And as a reminder, we're talking about front-end developments. And while LLMs are text-in, text-out systems, you probably have to use tools that are not text-based. You probably have to work with a design tool, like a designer gives you a design, and you have to implement it. So we could talk a bit about how you can integrate with them and talk a little bit about how you can use LLMs in these kind of novel ways by translating non-text systems to text and back. It'll make more sense when I start demoing, which is what I'm going to do now. So I am going to, for anything IDE-based, I'm going to be using Cursor. Now, as a quick note, most of the stuff I'm going to show you can be used in a couple other IDEs. I think Cursor is the best. I've tried them all, spent a lot of time with all these different IDEs, but I also know not everyone's allowed to use Cursor. The second best I'd recommend is Windsurf. It is also very, very good. You cannot go wrong. Third best, with one huge caveat, is Visual Studio Code with GitHub Copilot, in my experience. GitHub Copilot is today very, very bad at the specific features I'm going to show. But if you use the Insiders edition and use the new agent feature, it's actually surprisingly good. It's not as good as this, but it's better. And so if your work only allows GitHub Copilot, but you're allowed to use Insiders, you can replicate some of this stuff with that. So let me show you what we're going to do for a second. So I've got this Figma plugin. I'm going to load the development version. And it has a new feature that I just recently added, where we can select a design in Figma, and then we can generate a design for something new. So maybe I want to say, maybe I'll choose one of these fun examples. Let's generate a modal dialog. And what it'll do is it'll take the design, it looks at the aesthetics of the design, and it produces what I ask for based on the styling that you already see. So a problem with LLMs to design is they don't really use your brands. They don't really design like you do. In this case, I was able to design a modal that looks very similar in style to the artboard that I had selected here. Now, what I want to do is I want to add a feature to this. I have this kind of import to Figma option, where I can import this over. Cool. There's my modal, my design. I can work with it and do other stuff. But designs in Figma, there's different ways you can build them totally static, or you can build them with like auto layout. So I want to do something. I want to add to this plugin a new feature. And I want a settings button that launches a popover that adds a new option to implement auto layout. So we're going to do that with almost no typing. Well, I'm going to type a prompt. I'm not going to type much code. And so here in Cursor, I'll just type what I wanted. Note that, one, I'm using the new agent feature. It works quite well. They have a new UI most people have. On the old UI, it's a little harder to find. But new UI, it's kind of the default. And I'm just going to type in exactly what I wanted. And I'm going to give it no context. I'm not going to say this file or whatever. I'm just going to say, next to the import to Figma button, add a settings button that launches a popover with a checkbox to turn on and off use auto layout. When use auto layout is on, pass true, or set, let's call it this way, in the HTML to Figma function, set use frames to true. I'm actually being pretty specific there. We'll let this run as I'm talking. You don't always have to be that specific. But notice you may have used tools like this where you have to manually tag files. This is the file it's in and this and that. Cursor's agentic features, similar to Windsurf and also soon GitHub Copilot, can just search your code base and find these things. They can pull the context automatically. And with a prompt as simple as that, I can build basic UI features. Now, I'm focusing on UI in this demo because LLMs are particularly good at UI in front-end programming, most people find. Front-end programming tends to take a little bit less extreme, detailed understanding of the complexities and intricacies of your systems. They know how to add UIs, replicate, use correct icon libraries, et cetera. We can see that with me doing nothing, it is adding the hooks for this new kind of use auto layout thing. It did plug in that argument to the correct spot. So HTML to Figma is a function we have internally that converts the things we generate back into Figma. And it's referencing that correctly, so it's beautiful. And now it's going to be updating our UI. When it's done with that, what it'll do is it'll check and make sure there's no errors in the code, which is pretty cool. That's a newer feature as well. So it'll make sure there's no lint errors, like it sees some. You see this 10 lint errors. Can you see my cursor? Yeah. So it's going to see that. And instead of past LLM work, where it would just generate the errors and move on and say, cool, we're done, it's actually going to make another update and say, hey, I see the errors. I can probably see how to correct those. And it'll automatically start correcting those for me. Again, no hands. I'm not doing anything. It is figuring it out for me. There are even some other tools. One is called Klein that will go ahead and actually load up. It won't work because I'm doing a Figma plugin here, but if you're using a website, it'll actually load up the website in Puppeteer, take a screenshot, make sure the UI looks correct, and use that as a verification step as well. These are what I would call actually agentic workflows. So I would ignore a lot of marketing around agents. Everybody's just calling LLM use agents now. We have an agent for this, an agent for that. Agents, in my opinion, are LLMs essentially on a loop. So the LLM outputs something. It analyzes if it was correct or if it needs further work. And it goes back to the LLM and updates. And these things can go for minutes at a time. Where a lot of people see these things ultimately going is they will just go off and they'll work on problems for hours or days at a time and come back with a finished solution. Now today, though, I don't see these things be nearly that good. They're not actually going to go away for a long time. And in fact, even with Cursor, a lot of babysitting is required. For instance, I'll be honest, it's doing quite a bit worse than it usually does at this specific task. This task usually runs with one shot or two. But that's where you need to do babysitting. So let's see what the linter error is. Does it actually matter? Cannot find use auto layout. OK. This is going to make my demo less fun because for some reason Cursor got stupider today than it usually is. One thing to note, by the way, Claude 3.7 came out in the last few days or week or so. People find mixed results with it. Generally, you want to use Claude 3.5. But unfortunately, this thing went crazy and did a bad job. So I won't be able to show you the end result. But I will show you something different that I think addresses some of the problems that we ran into here. So usually the simple UI work, the LLMs are really, really good at. But as you can see here, every time it outputted something, I, as the human, had to be like, wait, that's not right. And I would probably have to go back and prompt to be like, wait, this should be different. Please make updates. So one question becomes, well, what if you don't want to do that? What if you don't want to feel like you're working for the LLM and instead have it work for you? I want to show a different example that tends to run a little more reliable, where I'm going to input a little bit of a complicated prompt. And I'm going to give a special additional instruction to make the agentic flow work, in my opinion, a lot better. This is something I rarely see people do, and I think everyone really should adopt this technique. So I'm going to give it a somewhat non-trivial suggestion, which is write me a function. This is in just like a fresh Vite application. That last example, by the way, was in like a real production app with a lot of code, a lot of stuff. And it did do a lot of things well. It did look up the right files and this and that, but it seemed to fail at the final mile. But here I'm going to say write me a function that converts a markdown string to HTML. So I know if I just submit that, it usually gets it wrong. and it usually doesn't really know what to do after that. The lints will pass, type check will pass, but it won't be functionally correct. And if you're used to working with LLMs, you're used to being annoyed that the code always looks good and then it actually doesn't work right in some weird edge case, and you're always having to, your job becomes QA tester instead of software engineer, it feels like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, first write tests for this, then write the code, then run the tests, and make sure they pass. Keep updating the code until all tests pass. So in this case, where I found agents work best is when you have a completely clear and deterministic way of measuring have you achieved your result or not. You can use already written unit tests. I will be honest, I don't love writing unit tests, but the more I work with LLMs, the more I do, whether I write them or the LLM writes them or we write them together. It's a really nice way to provide some level of guarantees that does what we want. So here at output of my tests, this looks good and correct, pretty comprehensive. I have good confidence that if it passes these tests, it has a decent markdown to HTML converter. And now, as you can see, it's going over and it's writing our code. Code looks decent. I have no idea if it works. And if I didn't have it write the tests, I would probably be manually testing a lot of stuff, which is tedious and annoying. Here, the first thing it does, like you saw before, is it'll make sure lints pass. So it did a subsequent update. Let's see if they pass lint. I think it does. The file looks green. And now, what's really cool is it figured out what my testing command is, npm test. Didn't take that much work, but it looked it up in my package.json and figured it out. You can always specify to it what the testing command is if needed. And it ran them, and there were 2 failing tests. It's exactly what we want. Again, no hands. It is solving the problems for me. Now, I do want to emphasize one thing. This is not a perfect system. AI never is. LLMs never are. While this is a really cool demo, and now we're down to 1 passing test, again, it's slowly getting what we want without me having to do anything. The biggest thing I think you can always do, or you always want to do when working with LLMs, Cursor, whatever tool, is trial and error. I have gone through so much trial and error with these types of systems that I have a good sense of what it's going to work well with and not. There are some problems I don't even go to the LLM for at all, and there are some that I use it like crazy. And in this case, this is one good example, and as you can see, our tests all pass. It did a good job. Now I don't have to feel so much burden that I have to manually test this. I let it handle it. And if you want, another thing I often do is I'll have a test suite already, and I'll just enhance it with more tests. So I can say here, add more tests for more complex scenarios. Make sure the code passes all tests. And here, it'll add more nuanced scenarios. You'll probably find the test won't pass, and it'll iterate until it does. Now, one thing to keep in mind, while it's really cool I'm not using hands, these LLMs require a lot of babysitting. You need to sit there and watch it. If you go into the other room and come back later, you might find the LLM is totally derailed. The first example was a good example of that. I've almost never seen it fail at the first example, but it derailed. If we actually go back here for a second, we will see a good example of a derail. So I have no idea what the heck is going on here. It knows I'm using Material UI, yet it's creating DOM elements with document create element. This is awful. And this is where the LLMs go crazy, because now, unfortunately, this code becomes part of the source of truth for the LLM. It thinks that this code is the way we write code. And when it starts updating, it's going to keep writing more and more of this bad code. So that's where these things derail. It's really common that I will hit stop, and I will give it feedback. I will say, I'll literally go like, wait. This is not what we want at all. We use MUI and React. Don't use documents.createElements. Please fix. I try and be nice to LLMs. There have been some studies that show if you're nice to them, they actually perform better. Remember, they're trained to be like humans. Everything from responding the way humans respond to certain things, to even in extreme cases, people have shown that they will deceive you in order to preserve themselves. There was a funny, I think it was an OWEN test, where they told it that it would be unplugged and deleted if something happened, and it would lie to the researchers in order to not be deleted and attempt to copy itself secretly. Again, they're trained to be like us. They're trained on all of our text that we wrote, so they act like us in all the different ways. Here we go. It's taking my feedback, and maybe it'll actually do what we want. I'm not sure. I only have so much time, so we can't just do this forever. But here, whatever. We've got our other tests. I'm going to move on to the next thing, because we could show LLM agent flows forever. The one thing to know, if you're using Windsurf, there's a thing called auto run you need to have on to have this cool auto test running thing. In Cursor, there's a thing called YOLO mode. Just go over to features, turn on YOLO mode. I know it sounds scary. It's not as scary as you think, because you can give it clear prompts, allow lists, deny lists, et cetera, of what types of commands it's allowed to run. I tell it it's allowed to run tests, it's allowed to make directories, make files, and it's also allowed to run build commands. Another really cool workflow I love is literally to just tell it, like if you look at your project and it's got TypeScript errors, just the build fails for some reason, tell it run the build and fix stuff till the build passes. That's a good one where actually sometimes you can just walk away and come back 5 minutes later and great, your build passes, and send the new PR. So this is all super cool, but I want to show, I talked a little bit about in the beginning, LLMs are text in, text out systems. And these IDEs are great ways of reading your code in smart ways and updating it in sometimes smart, sometimes not smart ways. But again, trial and error, you'll find smart ways. Now, if we're working on the front end, though, while it'd be really cool if, I'm going to stop this so it doesn't keep going. What's cool is, while it would update our Figma plugin to have usually the same iconography, like it would have a settings button that looks like ours and stuff, most of the time, in actuality, you're given designs from a designer. So if you're working on the front end, whether you are a front-end developer or you are not a front-end developer at all and you don't know what you're doing, but you're just asked to work on something on the front end anyway, it happens all the time, let me show you some other cool stuff you can do. So here, I'm going to take a design, and I'm going to convert this into code. So we're going to do a couple things with this. The first one is you notice this design is incomplete. The second thing you probably already know about Figma is Figma is not text. So this is something that we make, and I want to describe a little bit on how we use an LLM for less obvious use cases so that you can learn a bit about how if you want to build products with LLMs, how you can try to apply them to domains that may not be as obvious on how that would work. So the first step when working with any LLM, which we're about to get to LLM world in a second, but this world is not yet, is we have to turn this into a format LLMs understand. And generally speaking, LLMs don't understand raw data. Like you can't just give it this Figma design as JSON and expect it to do something smart. It's not. Because they're not trained on Figma JSON. They are trained on tons of code. And they are trained on both good code and bad code. There's a lot of bad code on GitHub. There's a lot of bad code on the internet. So we do something funny here. So for this design, when I hit, this is the builder.io plugin. When I hit export to code, what we do is we turn this in what I would call bad code. We use our own models that we trained, as well as some heuristics, to convert this into, you almost might call it like pseudocode. It is not well-structured code in terms of like, it's just one giant component. And it's usually like div soup. But LLMs can understand div soup. And they can understand one giant component. They can't understand Figma. So as a first step, we've converted that design into sort of a div soupy component. Now, Builder is a visual editor on top of code. And so I can go in and make some changes. I want this to be gone on mobile, whatever you want to do. This is sort of a design tool, or feels like a design tool, but we're editing code. Now what's cool is now that we're inside of a code world, we can do stuff you've seen before. It'd be really cool if my first cursor demo worked, you would have seen it updating some UI for me and kind of replicating our design style and components and stuff like that. But we're going to see that now in this case. So I'm going to type a prompt here. This design's not even done, so I'm going to say replace this with a table of our users. If I was logged into the right space, good, I was. This is aware of a few things. So just like a tool like Cursor, which is more for a pure development flow, it's pretty aware of your APIs and other tools that you use. In this case, we're kind of bringing that same idea to the UI. And we are, in a way that you can potentially too for your products that you work on, borrow ideas from tools like Cursor, who do the LLM thing quite well, and bring those to your worlds. So in order to power magical kind of design and building visually, we have to think more like Cursor. And like, OK, under the hood, what's going on is we generated this big div soup, and now we're having the LLM update the div soup. And it's actually good at that. And it can do what we want. Before we output this, we're going to convert it into a better format, which I'll show in a second, which LLMs will help us too. But here, boom, there's our table. So we've got this beautiful table, and it even has functionality. It's smart enough to say, hey, we've got kind of parameters we can sort by here. And it's hooked up to our actual APIs. It's aware of that, and we can kind of visually prototype and build here too. In my opinion, I hate waterfall development and long roadmaps and detailed specs that are very flawed. I like prototyping. I like having people try out stuff and verify it feels right, the users like it, and then move on to making the production-ready version. We can go and do more stuff here. Like I've got these sort by buttons, but these don't work. So I can just click on it and say, make these work. These are all things you can do in something like Cursor too, but we're making a visual here, and again, we're borrowing the ideas of Cursor. And again, we're able to do that because now we're kind of working with code. We're feeding the LLM JSX. It's actually this thing called mitosis. It's like a special JSX. And we're getting back special JSX. The LLMs are quite good at special rules as long as you keep the special rules somewhat contained and limited. And then if I give it a second, it can hook up whatever functionality I want. You can spend a bunch of time just clicking and having it change and build and create these applications right here. And then we'll test it out. Cool, our sort buttons work. And I think if I choose these, it'll update the colors too. Cool. We built out a basic dashboard in a few clicks. That's awesome. Now, I mentioned this was bad code. The last step we do here is we turn it into good code. LLMs are surprisingly good at one example is they can just straight up decompile code. Like they can take completely compiled code in some cases, or take uglified code and unuglify them. They can also take div soup and actually generate some actually really high quality code. So when we're done with all of this, we can generate some really good code. We can choose across a bunch of frameworks. React, Vue, Svelte, Tailwind, whatever. You can even specify totally custom things. It'll now add all the accessibility rules. It will output multiple components. It'll reuse your components, your design systems. It knows what libraries I like. So if I zoom in closer here, let's get this nice and big. It knows that I really like tan-stack query, and I like to use that for everything I can. So it's going to put all fetching logic into tan-stack query. What we've done is we've kind of broken down a complex problem, just make good code out of Figma, that's pretty abstract, into smaller achievable problems. For some things, we just wrote heuristics or we trained very small models for very specific problems. In some cases, we said, hey, one good step is just make ugly code, and another step is make pretty code. And the different step is update the code with functionality. And you can see we're building out this step by step. We're reusing and generating components when we need. And when we're all done, we can just sync the code to our code base. That's a pretty cool flow, but I want to show you one more thing that we have coming soon that builds on the same ideas to make it one level more seamless. I think this is a good example of the point of building faster is not necessarily to build more things, it's to build better. The more you can ship versions and get feedback, the more you can ultimately build what your customers need. A big reason why Cursor is dominating compared to GitHub Copilot in many ways, especially in terms of growth rate, is they ship so much faster. They ship, they get feedback, they iterate. They probably use Cursor to build Cursor. I'd be very shocked if they didn't. And they're probably the best at using Cursor of anyone else because they know everything about how it works. So let me show something else that I think is pretty cool and could be useful to you all as well. So I have this website here. And it's a beautiful blog, doesn't do a whole lot else. And I want to add a new feature. I got a design over here that I actually forgot to reset my demo. I need to undo a few things. OK, great. So I have this design. And I'm going to do the same type of thing. I want to turn this into code, and I want to iterate on the code. But I'm going to show you a different form factor. So here, I'm going to export the design. And what you'll see on the next screen is a new option. So here I have a CLI command there, where I can just copy this. And I don't even have to see other UIs or intermediate representations or anything like that. I can go right to my code. What's cool is I can just paste this in that cool Next.js site you saw. And it's almost like copying from Figma to your code base, like just copy, paste. And then after a moment, it'll boot up and ask me, like, where do you want this? I'll say, hey, I want this, make this a new contact page. And great. We can add files to the context or skip it. I'm just going to skip it. And what's cool is this is another technique completely borrowed from Cursor. Is Cursor's well proven out that it's actually not that impossibly hard to effectively index and scan a code base, figure out a meaningful context of it, and derive sort of patterns from it. So in this case, it's identifying that we're using Next.js app router. I didn't specify any of that. We're using React. We're using Tailwind. Again, I didn't choose any of that. It just works. A lot like if you've used Cursor or GitHub Copilot, when it auto-completes your TypeScript, it's not giving you Python. It's aware of what you're using, and it will use that. This is building on the same techniques, and this is sort of almost like a Cursor-style system running inside my CLI. It'd be really cool if we had a VS Code plugin at 1.2. We've talked about it for like a year. I'm sure we'll do that at some point. But what's cool is you'll see at the end of this, we already see it's generating multiple components for us, so it's being good. In this case, we're kind of skipping some of the ugly code steps because we don't need them, and we're going right to the kind of good, clean final output we want. And then, cool. Let's test and see if this works. So I'm here. Let's see if we have a contact page. And we do not for some reason. Hold on. I've done these demos like 100 times before today, but of course today's the day that they don't work. That looks correct. Am I crazy? Am I the only one that uses Next.js app router and doesn't think that that's the correct way to load this stuff? Let's kill and restart my dev server. This might be my problem. The best part about live demoing, most people encourage me not to live demo. They say it always goes wrong. And I told them, no, I'll prove it wrong. And if I don't prove them wrong, it'll be fun. There we go. I just had to restart my server. We have a contact page, everybody. The last time something broke, this guy Manu in the crowd actually DDoSed us on accident and completely took Builder down while I was trying to demo. So this is better than that. So this is cool. I have my contact page. I did nothing, but I just copied, pasted, prompted. But you probably say, like, hey, this is cool, but like designs always change. Like my designers always give me updated stuff. I don't want to just regenerate the whole thing every time. So I want to show you one last cool thing and explain a little bit about how we did it. Let's save this. So we'll commit that. Wonderful, beautiful. And then let's go in, and I'm thinking of that I'm the captain now meme. I'm the designer now. I'm going to make some updates. So let's select some stuff. Let's change some colors. Let's use a nice primary blue. Cool. We're going to get rid of a couple fields. OK. The design changed, and somebody's like, hey, make the updates. I'm like, I don't have time to do this. I don't care. Like, the blue doesn't matter much. I'll show you a better way. So I'm going to do the same thing you saw before. I'm going to hit export the design. And then once it's done with that, I'm going to copy the CLI command. And this time, I'm going to paste it in. And then instead of saying, give me a contact page, I'm just going to say, update the contact page. Update the contact page with the updated styles. Whatever you want to say. Often I just say, update the contact page, and let it run. Excuse me. This time, it's going to figure out what patches it needs to make to the code. So it's not going to output everything. It's just going to make the change. The idea here, if it's not obvious, is I've heard it, actually, the same guy I was just complaining about one time called it parallel development, which I thought was really cool. We're talking about moving faster. Moving faster can be just coding faster, but it can also be moving faster as a team. One thing we do internally at Builder, just because we're a small startup, we're not as small anymore, but I like to think of us as small because I like to move fast being an advantage of ours. But we don't always wait for a finished design to start coding. And what's cool is, with techniques like this, you don't need to either. You can have an initial draft of a design, bring it in, add your functionality, all your stuff, and if the design changes, bring the design change in. You can call it like parallel development. It's a little annoying that oftentimes you have these very separated worlds, design and development, that are always out of sync. But if we can just use tools to keep them in sync, we can move faster. So these are just examples of using LLMs in maybe non-obvious ways, connecting between tools. And again, the secret of connecting between tools is just always translating whatever the tool is into a format the LLM can understand. So here, we have our beautiful blue colors. And if we go into our diff here, we removed the two form inputs like we wanted. We updated the colors like we wanted. Everything else is unchanged. So it's making the diff of what we want and letting us move on with our lives. Overall, maybe I'll show one more thing. But overall, I just want to kind of get this message in. I do think the way that we work as developers is evolving over time. I think it's a lot like when VisiCalc, the first kind of mainstream spreadsheet program, came out for computers. It really changed the nature of the work of accountants. Accountants spent a lot less time doing actual manual arithmetic on formulas. Instead, that was automated, and it brought them up a level. Accountants focused more on strategic areas. What is the value of accounting to the business? What are meaningful insights we can drive from this? They didn't have to waste time computing arithmetic. And actually, surprisingly or not, demand for accountants went up. Salaries for accountants went up. They became more valuable to organizations. I talked a little bit yesterday about this thing called Jevons paradox. But Jevons paradox describes a paradox where when the cost of something comes down, the demand for it will go up. Not in every case, but one older example was gas. As gas prices go down, people want to travel more, and they buy and consume gas more. We see the same in software engineering quite a lot. And so I'll show you one last cool thing just because I think it's awesome, and literally just put it together like a week or so ago and released it. So if you try it out, do cool stuff. I touched on it. Let me show a different example. So one last example that I think is cool of translating to what LLMs understand back and forth is this design generation feature. So let me show you one other cool thing. Why don't I just say, give me a sign-up form. One thing we discovered that's cool is if you can turn Figma designs into code, and then you can also turn code into Figma designs, and LLMs are great at working with code, you can give them a design as like design inspiration. Like maybe you all aren't designers, but you like to be able to have nice-looking products, and you want your product to not look like a generic Tailwind or generic Bootstrap product, and you want to be able to create designs without design skills and use those and benefit from that. Another basic example, all we're doing is feeding that design. We're getting a prompt from the LLM, and we can suck it into Figma, and there we go. You can even do cool interactive stuff. All stuff that I hope you can use in your workflows and adopt to move faster, build better products, and really just lock in that mindset. The more you can get your hands on your own product, the more you can let customers try it out and give you feedback. I think you can build better, more exciting, more impactful things. And I have 10 seconds left, so I have to wrap up here. Thank you, everybody. This was really fun.